All right, so we're looking at nutrition for special populations today. We are going to be kind of talking about what I mean when I say special populations. So, really what that is like somebody who is dealing with like a specific disease or condition, right? And again, just to be very clear, we don't treat diseases or conditions as personal trainers, as nutritionists, anything like that. Like that is not our role. What we do is we encourage people to adopt healthy lifestyles, and we educate them on what those healthy lifestyles are so that they can make informed decisions that we can help them, guide them in that direction. Again, kind of goes back to that idea of guided self-help, right? Like, they're the ones doing this. But we are sort of like pushing them in the right directions here. So, we'll talk about a little bit about diabetes. We'll talk about like pregnant clients, child or teen athletes, collegiate level athletes, master athletes, which is the coolest name in the world for seniors, and vegetarian athletes. So a lot of different populations to sort of get through, but like I said, each of the pieces of information is kind of like segmented. A lot of times what would actually happen, if you are sort of working with someone, is like you wouldn't necessarily have to sit down with them and lay all this out like off the get-go. You'd probably be like, all right, great, here's some generally good nutrition advice. Let's adopt these healthy behaviors. We're going to get together next time, and when we get together next time, I'll come in with some specific information, and then you can go home, look this stuff up, come up with a plan of action and bring it back to your client and actually implement it after that. So don't feel like, when we go through this like wall of, info and stuff, you have to have all this like on the top of your brain every time. A lot of times, like even with like certain injuries and stuff, when I'm trying to think of like what the best exercise for an injury is, right? Like Simon, I showed you one calf stretch. I was like, this will be a really good one. Do this, right? But like if if you were my client, I'd probably do a little bit like hunt around the internet a little bit, be like, what would fit Simon's schedule and style really well, what would go well in this routine. I would think a little bit more about it. So some of it's on the top of your head, right? But a lot of it is like you go back and look that stuff up. So don't feel any pressure to like have everything in this PowerPoint memorized after today is basically what I'm getting at. So meal plans, we talked about like the idea of like a meal plan for a special population. The things we're going to look at in the beginning are basically, we're going to pay attention to, their beginning like metabolic needs. So it's probably going to start with you going to like a BMR calculator or a TEE calculator is like another one. So you can go, all right, they're 35, 175 pounds, 6 foot 0 inches, and highly active, right? So we'll say they're doing heavy exercise, right? We hit calculate, and there we go. We got a pretty good idea of like their basal metabolic rates around like 1,670 calories a day. And then based on if they were sedentary, lightly active, or very active, right? I love this one because it also shows you like, you can see like what the other versions of lifestyles would look like. So it's like, you can kind of see it's about a difference of about 300 calories each time, a little bit more in the very beginning, just because the jump from basal to regular lifestyles is a little bit bigger. But I love this because then you can kind of show them, right? Like I love having a client who is generally sedentary and being like, but if you were physically active, you start actually training with me like 2 or 3 days a week, you actually get to eat a little bit closer to this, so then it kind of shows us what their ideal body weight would be. This is a pretty decent enough formula, and then we have like a breakdown. If they're going for a cut, if they're going for a bulk, if they're going for maintenance, based on like a moderate carb, which is my favorite, low carb or high carb diet. So that is sort of a general, very simple energy calculator based on lifestyle. And then we would just track that and see like how it's changing over the weeks. You train them for 2 weeks, they should have lost 2 pounds, they gained a pound. Okay, let's make some adjustment to those calories, because chances are we either overestimated physical activity or we underestimated, how much food is coming in. So you're going to look at the basic metabolic needs of your client based on their athlete, their sport, their population, and all of that. So first we're going to look at where we're going to consider some specific things. We're going to look at diabetes, right? So diabetes is a metabolic disorder that affects your blood sugar, right? So the idea here is that your cells, you're either going to see there's two types of diabetes. You are either going to see type 1 diabetes, which is very much less common. Only about 5% out of all cases of diabetes are type 1. And that's where the pancreas isn't creating enough insulin. And it's doing that because this is we call it an autoimmune disease, right? So an autoimmune disease is basically where your immune system, for some reason, is attacking itself, right? So like or not the immune system attacking itself, but your immune system's attacking your body, right? So like rheumatoid arthritis is kind of an example of an autoimmune disease, right? It's where someone experiences a little bit of like joint trauma, the same way we always do. Like every step you take is joint trauma, you know? We've got all these tools in our joints that cushion the blows and stuff. But with somebody with like rheumatoid arthritis, for some reason their body goes, ah, and then makes all this extra tissue and shoves it into the joint, which then like crowds the joint and makes it inflamed and very painful and difficult to move around, which creates sort of a vicious cycle, right? Multiple sclerosis is where the neurons actually get attacked. It eats the myelin of our neurons, which interrupts our, nervous system signals, making it difficult to be coordinated and stuff. That's an autoimmune disease. We don't fully understand why the body does these things. There's a couple medications that sometimes have positive effects on these things, but usually it's through like suppressing the immune system. But diabetes type 1 is an autoimmune disorder. It's where your immune system, for some reason, is disrupting your pancreas's ability to release insulin into the blood. So then what ends up happening is your blood sugar levels just remain elevated, and you end up becoming what we call hyperglycemic, right? Hyper for a lot, glycemia meaning like sugar in the blood, right? So there's a lot of sugar in the blood. That's abnormally high blood sugar levels, which doesn't really sound like that big a deal because it's like, well, I'm supposed to have sugar in my blood anyways, right? What is possibly the harm of having a lot of it? Well, it's kind of like trying to live your life with just like a bunch of crap in your way. Like your cells are trying to do all their jobs. They're trying to function normally and healthy, right? But they just can't. There's literally a bunch of stuff crowding them, and so they can't do what they need to, right? There's too much sugar interrupting the movement of oxygen, minerals, electrolytes, all kinds of problems, right? So that happens. So that hyperglycemia can happen with type 1 diabetics because their pancreas isn't creating insulin. And insulin's job is to drive sugar out of your blood into your cells, right? But the same thing can happen with type 2 diabetes, but for a very different reason. Type 2 diabetes is where the body has actually become insulin resistant, right? So when we talk about like, how the body sort of like develops resistance to something, I do have a really kind of interesting video to show you that doesn't have anything to do with diabetes. It actually has to do with caffeine consumption, but I wanted to like get this video in here somewhere this class and kind of cover a little bit about how caffeine, because coffee is a very popular supplement, right? So here's our final video, here in nutrition. Skip that, pause that, and open it. Okay, here we go. Again, this video is about caffeine, but I want you to think of like type 2 diabetes. The body is becoming resistant to insulin. Here's caffeine.
Over 100,000 metric tons of caffeine are consumed around the world every year. That's equivalent to the weight of 14 Eiffel Towers. Most of this caffeine is consumed in coffee and tea, but it's also ingested in some sodas, chocolate, caffeine pills, and even beverages labeled decaf. Caffeine helps us feel alert, focused, happy, and energetic, even if we haven't had enough sleep. But it can also raise our blood pressure and make us feel anxious. It's the world's most widely used drug. So how does it keep us awake? Caffeine evolved in plants, where it serves a few purposes. In high doses, As it's found in the leaves and seeds of certain species, it's toxic to insects. But when they consume it in lower doses, as it's found in nectar, it can actually help them remember and revisit flowers. In the human body, caffeine acts as a stimulant for the central nervous system. It keeps us awake by blocking one of the body's key sleep-inducing molecules, a substance called adenosine. Your body needs a constant supply of energy, which it gets by breaking down a high-energy molecule called ATP. In the process, it liberates adenosine, ATP's chemical backbone. Neurons in your brain have receptors perfectly tailored to this molecule. When adenosine docks to these receptors, it activates a cascade of biochemical reactions that cause neurons to fire more sluggishly and slow the release of important brain signaling molecules. In other words, you get sleepy. Caffeine is what's called an adenosine receptor antagonist. That means it derails this process of slowing your neurons down by blocking adenosine receptors. Caffeine and adenosine have a similar molecular structure, close enough that caffeine can wedge into the adenosine receptors, but not close enough to activate them. To summarize, adenosine inhibits your neurons. Caffeine inhibits the inhibitor, so it stimulates you. Caffeine can also boost positive feelings. In some neurons, the adenosine receptors are linked to receptors for another molecule called dopamine. One of dopamine's roles in the brain is to promote feelings of pleasure. When adenosine docks in one of these paired receptors, that can make it harder for dopamine to fit in its own spot, interrupting its mood-lifting work. But when caffeine takes adenosine's place, it doesn't have the same effect, and dopamine can slide in. There's evidence that caffeine's effects on adenosine and dopamine receptors can have long-term benefits too, reducing the risk of diseases like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and some types of cancer. Caffeine can also ramp up the body's ability to burn fat. In fact, some sports organizations think that caffeine gives athletes an unfair advantage and have placed limits on its consumption. From 1972 until 2004, Olympic athletes had to stay below a certain blood caffeine concentration to compete. Of course, not all of caffeine's effects are so helpful. It might make you feel better and more alert, but it can also raise your heart rate and blood pressure, cause increased urination or diarrhea, and contribute to insomnia and anxiety. Plus, the foods and beverages caffeine is found in have their own impacts on your body that have to be taken into account. Your brain can adapt to regular consumption of caffeine. If your adenosine receptors are perpetually clogged, your body will manufacture extra ones. That way, even with caffeine around, adenosine can still do its job of signaling the brain to power down. That's why you may find you need to consume more and more caffeine to feel as alert. There are more and more adenosine receptors to block. It's also why if you suddenly quit caffeine, you may experience an unpleasant withdrawal. With plenty of receptors and no competition, adenosine can work overtime, causing symptoms like headaches, tiredness, and depressed moods. But in a few days, the extra adenosine receptors will disappear. Your body will readjust, and you'll feel just as alert as ever, even without an infusion of the world's most popular stimulant.
Okay, so that is, yeah, it's caffeine. I wanted to find a way to kind of shoehorn that video into this class at some point, but you can see, right, like how the big deal is that, you know, it eventually becomes resistant, right? Like when there is so much adenosine in the receptors in our brain, uh, you know, your brain will actually make more like spaces for those receptors, which is why it takes more and more and more caffeine. That is similar to how the resistance works in our type 2 diabetics, because the insulin goes and it starts trying to act on our cells start making more receptors, and it takes more and more and more insulin to get the same job done. So what we'll do instead, you know, to sort of treat this is when a type 2 diabetic ends up hyperglycemic is they'll take insulin, right? Now, for a type 1 diabetic, that makes a lot of sense. They take insulin and then they got enough insulin in their body because their pancreas didn't make any. But with a type 2 diabetic, they have to be very careful because it's like, well, now you're just sort of flooding the problem even worse, which is where like new diabetes medications started to come out, like metformin and things like that, which actually increase the receptor's ability to accept insulin. And that way, like their pancreas, which is working just fine in a type 2 diabetic, then becomes like a little bit more effective. So hyperglycemia is abnormally high blood sugar levels, which obviously causes complications, but there's also hypoglycemia. Hypoglycemia is where the blood sugar levels are a little bit too low. And so like if you take synthetic insulin and it drives all the sugar out of your blood sugar levels drop to a really low level, which is where you're going to start getting hunger cravings. You're probably going to be pretty freaking cranky at that point, you know, and you're going to uptake like a lot of food. This is one of the reasons why like diabetics often like continue to struggle with like their diets and eating properly, is because like their blood sugar levels going up and down and up and down and up and down. And it becomes really difficult to control their blood sugar levels. When we have a difficult time controlling our blood sugar levels, it triggers our body's hunger hormones, which cause us to want to intake like a lot of food. So like if you haven't eaten in a couple of hours, you start getting like kind of cranky, your blood sugar is relatively low, your body's like, I need food right freaking now. And so then you overeat. And when you overeat, you bring in tons of glucose. And then that causes your blood sugar levels to spike to levels that everybody goes, oh no, we need to make a whole bunch of insulin. So then it makes a bunch of insulin and it drives all the sugar out, right? It's like, you know, just it's just really difficult to get balance because there's no sort of like leveling things out. Versus like if you bring it in kind of slowly and you know, eat regularly throughout the day, keeps your blood sugar levels, you know, in a good spot. So some of the effects of diabetes that are out there. So like I said, insulin's this hormone that triggers the removal of glucose in the bloodstream. Now, actually, before I get into that, there is another hormone that your pancreas makes, which is the exact opposite of insulin, which is called glucagon. So glucagon is a hormone that actually triggers the release of glucose from your body cells in order to raise your blood sugar levels. So if your blood sugar levels get really, really low, and again, you start getting a little cranky, you start feeling a little unstable, you know, not so great, right? Your body can release glucagon, which will tell your body to release glycogen from like your muscles and your liver and things like that in order to get your blood sugar levels back to normal. But when you produce glucagon, that is when we trigger, hey, we should also probably be making some hunger hormones so that this Yahoo at the wheel actually drives us over to, you know, a McDonald's and get some freaking soda, which is going to raise your blood sugar levels, you know, like, so glucagon's really great and it's a good hormone to create, but like, the problem with it is that it also, you know, triggers the release of like hunger hormones simultaneously. So one of the effects of diabetes as well is that your body will start creating like ketone molecules, more commonly referred to as like ketone bodies. Now you might have heard of ketone bodies if you've ever done any research on a ketogenic diet. So a ketogenic diet is, or you know, keto diet, right? Is the idea that like you look at a diet like this. It's basically most of your diet, about 75% of it is going to consist of fat, with about 20% of it consisting of protein, and only about 5% of it consisting of carbohydrates. So you have an incredibly, incredibly low carbohydrate diet, which means you are not using glucose to produce energy, right? So what's going to happen instead is that your body is going to create ketone bodies, because that is sort of the byproduct of this process called beta oxidation. You guys might remember beta oxidation when we talked about like burning fat for fuel. So that's actually fine to create some ketone diets, right? When you have insufficient carbohydrates and your body makes these, you know, metabolizes fat instead, that's actually okay. Your body is designed to be able to do that. But there is like a certain point where there are so many ketone bodies flowing through your blood, you end up in what is called ketosis, which is where there's a ton of ketone bodies in the blood. And those can also start to have kind of some interesting effects. They are full of hydrogen ions, which means that like they are going to make your blood more acidic. And you can end up with what's called ketoacidosis, which is where there's too many acidic materials inside of your blood. And that can cause like a certain amount of problems, right? But this is one of the reasons why they'll tell you to drink like alkaline water, because alkaline is very base compared to like ketone. And like that's very popular amongst ketogenic athletes. They'll also say like, hey, don't get very many carbohydrates in your diet. But if you look at a keto diet example, you will see a lot of foods when it does come to the greens and stuff, a lot of them are going to be leafy greens. Now, part of that is because like it's fiber, which means there's not going to be very many carbohydrates in there. But another part of it is like alkaline foods that are like dark green in particular. The darker green a color is probably the more alkaline it is. So green beans, spinach, lettuce, things like that. Those are all very alkaline foods, which can sort of have that opposite of the acidosis effect. Ketoacidosis is becoming acidic because of like ketone bodies in your blood, but you can become like hyperacidic with anybody. You can also become hyperalkaline as well. On the other direction, you can have what's called hyperalkalosis, and that your body doesn't work that way very well either. But nobody ever ends up that way. Nobody's ever like too alkaline because nobody likes to eat their vegetables. So that's another reason why like keto diets, are they healthy? Yeah, I think they can be, if they are done properly, but there's not a lot of evidence to suggest that it's necessarily like superior than an average diet in general. Now, when people hear that, sometimes they get really defensive and they're like, well, it's better for me. Yeah, I didn't say that it wasn't, but just because it's better for you doesn't mean that it's better in general, right? Like that's sort of the distinction that we're making here. So would I put every one of my clients on keto? No. Would I put every one of my clients on a regular sort of standard American diet? Also, probably no. I would say that that's going to fit most people. But again, like I might have somebody with some interesting, condition that things need to get specific. So this is why we need to take a look at like special populations, right? With our type 1 diabetics or our type 2 diabetics, right? We want to make sure that like they are getting proper nutrients. So like that's one of my problems with the keto diet is like it's very difficult to get enough vitamins and minerals, particularly minerals and fat soluble vitamins. Those are the hard ones to get on like a keto diet. B vitamins are found in like a lot of like proteins, meats, and things like that. So like those are usually packed full of like a lot of those. And then certain minerals like phosphorus and things like that, those are also really easy to get from meat, obviously iron and stuff like that. But it's the other ones that are like kind of a little bit more rare sometimes. That's where I'm like, that's not a very good source of potassium. It's going to be very difficult to get potassium. Best sources of potassium are usually very carbohydrate rich foods. And we know we need sodium and potassium in order to like create ATP, in order to create like action potentials, right? So type 1 diabetes, your pancreas isn't creating enough. So that's where someone's going to take insulin level injections. And honestly, that's just going to help raise their glucose levels back to normal. Type 2 diabetics, their cells are actually unresponsive to the insulin. So why does that happen? Well, a lot of times it's due to like obesity, right? We know that obesity is very tied to type 2 diabetics because obviously there's a lot of fat surrounding the pancreas. There's a lot like abdominal fat in particular raises your risk. But we also know that like the same habits that create an obese person, which is like, a substantial amount of like energy in versus, energy out. That's also going to mean, that's also going to mean the same kind of thing for a diabetic person as it's going to mean for an obese person. And then there is also pre-diabetes. I don't necessarily, you don't have to spend too much time looking at like pre-diabetes. Pre-diabetes is basically where it's like your blood sugar levels are not elevated enough to meet the criteria, but they are more elevated than they're supposed to be. Don't put too much emphasis on that term until your doctor tells you, it's like, hey, like you're at risk of diabetes, because like consistently while we're checking your blood sugar levels, they're always elevated. Now it becomes like a problem. But I've had like people be like, oh, I went into my blood sugar level was out of normal. And it's like, did you have a cupcake before you went into the doctor's office? And they're like, I did have a cupcake before I went to the, it's like, well, you know, so it needs to, in order to be, we need to see a fasting glucose level that's elevated. That's where we're in trouble. So symptoms of diabetes, you'll see excessive thirst is one. That's your body trying to bring in water to thin out your blood so that it can function a little bit better. Excessive urination, that's actually kind of interesting because you're like, wait, I'm thirsty to get more water, but I'm also urinating more and I'm losing water. That doesn't make any sense. Again, it's a disease, right? It's causing your body to function in ways that don't make sense. The excessive urination is actually your body trying to get rid of excess sugar. And so it will put sugar into your urine and then you will pee it out. And so like a diabetic's urine is going to have more sugar in it than the average person. Dehydration because of the excessive urination stuff. Dizziness, headache, blurred vision. Blurred vision is actually because like the sugar, the cells in your eyes are really small, guys. Your eyeballs are tiny. So if you have like sugar and it's like in your eyes, like running through that, you know, it can't properly like move oxygen around. So the cells in your eyes don't function properly. So it can cause blurred vision stuff. Sometimes we'll see unexplained weight loss that's usually associated with type 1 diabetics, where basically their body is not creating enough energy and things like that. Excessive hunger, that's again commonly associated with type 2 diabetics because blood sugar levels get low and they go up and they go down. And then poor or slow wound healing, this is probably the most famous diabetic symptom, which is where like there's so much sugar in your blood that your wounds can't heal properly. So you'll end up with what's called a diabetic ulcer, where you'll basically have like a hole where you got like a small cut or something and it didn't heal properly. And so like it just gets infected and eaten away. And that's how, if you've ever heard of like a diabetic needing to like, they'll lose a toe or lose a foot or something like that. You got to remember that like those areas are really small blood vessels. And so it's much more common to like deal with that there. The other symptom that we're going to see that's really big is what's called neuropathy, particularly what's called peripheral neuropathy, where diabetics will get like numbness or tingling in the extremities. If you guys have a client with type 2 diabetes or type 1, but mostly type 2. If you have a client with type 2 diabetes, you have to be cautious of like making sure they wear the proper like footwear because they can get a blister without even realizing it. If you're encouraging them to do like a lot of hiking and stuff, you actually want to sort of coach them into making sure that they get the proper shoes, proper socks and things like that. Because if they get a blister on their foot and they have nerve damage and they don't feel that blister, they don't feel that ache or pain or burning sensation that we all get when we, you know, cut ourselves or get a blister or whatever. If they don't feel that, and then all of a sudden, like they don't take the time to like wash out the wound and, you know, keep it from getting infected, it can get infected. This is another reason why so many diabetics lose their toes, lose their feet, things like that. Small blood vessels, and a lot of times they don't know they hurt themselves. So if their blood sugar levels are greater than about 200 milligrams per deciliter of blood, you know, that is a sort of like criteria for diabetes. These are numbers that you can somewhat get familiar with, just because like if you start working with a diabetic client and they go to the doctor regularly, they might come back and tell you their blood sugar levels. Again, you don't need these memorized, guys. But if you're working with them for 6 months and it's like, hey, my blood glucose levels were 250 and today they were 240 and then a couple weeks later it's like 230, it's like, hey, everything's going in the right direction. We're almost under 200, you know? And I've definitely worked with plenty of clients over my career that like, you know, they are off insulin after working and like losing over 100 pounds or something like that. It's great, you know, we're not curing this disease, but like we're giving someone the tools necessary to take control of their health again. And that's again, sort of our major goal. So, nutrition recommendation for any of our diabetic clients, really like one of the biggest things is going to be that we want them to exercise as often as possible, right? So our considerations are like, we want them to engage in exercise. The other thing, we want them to engage in intense exercise. We actually like the hypertrophy style of lifting in the OPT model, right? When we look at that like middle range, where it's like, this is where in hypertrophy, it starts getting intense. Like we start to move from low intensity here to high intensity here. And then like we have really high intensity here, but the duration's relatively short. This middle hypertrophy range is perfect for diabetics because it keeps them in glycolysis, which means they're going to be burning through blood sugar. And if you have a client who has too much blood sugar, if we burn it all off for energy, that's fantastic, right? Because the next time they bring in a large amount of glucose, what's going to happen is their body's going to go, oh, there's a whole bunch of glucose coming in. There's a whole bunch of sugar coming into the blood. We should put this in our glycogen stores because clearly we use it regularly. So trying to make sure that they focus on glycolysis is really good for the training side of things. The nutrition side of things, make sure the focus is always on complex carbs and nutrient dense carbohydrates that are low in sugar. We're not trying to spike the blood sugar levels. We're trying to keep the blood sugar levels in a normal neutral position, right? So by ensuring that like we're not spiking them too high, we are ensuring that our nutrient recommendations are where we want them. Protein intake, we want them to be about 15 to 20%. Remember, if you get too much protein, your body will just turn those amino acids into glucose. So too high of a protein on a diabetic diet can also cause problems. And then fat, we want it to be about 30%. So they're still getting a large amount of carbohydrates, right? Just like any other client. The difference is we're making sure that those carbohydrate sources are much more complex so that it doesn't spike their blood sugar levels. Like let's say I'm going to make a fake chart here, right? So let's say we got like we make like a little pie chart or a line chart that's meant to kind of represent blood sugar levels, right? And let's say you bring in a food that is 80 grams of carbohydrates, right? Which is a lot, by the way. Like that's a substantial amount of sugar trapped within 80 grams of carbs. But let's say it's like a really complex carb. You bring in 80 grams of carbohydrates coming from like mashed potatoes with the skin on, and some like broccoli and things like that. In addition to like getting a little bit of like fats and like healthy fats and stuff on top, maybe you roasted that broccoli in like olive oil or something, right? Like you're getting a lot of fat, you're getting a little bit of protein in with your meal, and you're getting lots and lots and lots of fiber, and it's already a complex carb. Well, then what's going to happen is you're going to get 80 grams of carbohydrates, but they're going to be absorbed slowly. They're going to absorb like very slowly. And so your blood sugar might go like this, right? It might come up very, 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 very slowly. And then like that's going to cause it to eventually go back down to normal levels once your body goes, oh, let's make some insulin to, drive that blood sugar back to normal. Versus like if you brought in 80 grams right away, right? What ends up happening, out of like, let's say like a big old bowl of like Frosted Flakes or something, that's pure sugar. Your body didn't have to take any time to break that down. So it doesn't go any higher blood sugar wise, but look at how much it spiked. So then we create a ton of insulin in response we create so much insulin that it drives all the sugar out of our blood and then causes it to like drop down to normal levels. And like when you're about here, that's where you start to get hungry, right? So then like maybe this drops even below the line. You're really hungry, right? So then you need to take in like another 80 grams or something because you're starving. And so it just causes it to spike. That's the real problem here. The same amount of carbohydrates came in both scenarios, but the complex carbs raised blood sugar slowly, right? And then with your diabetic clients, you do got to be a little cautious. Sometimes exercise, because it does rely on sugar as a fuel source, can burn sugar out of the blood. And if they are also taking a medication that removes sugar from the blood, your client can sometimes become hypoglycemic, where their blood sugar levels get too low. If that happens with your diabetic clients, guys, try to have like some orange slices or a banana or an apple, like have some type of fruit that's kind of high in carbohydrates and like sugars that, again, I know we're trying to avoid sugars, but in this situation, it's like, oh, it's going to help my client. They start to get nauseous. They start to feel a little queasy, things like that, because their blood sugar levels are dropping too quickly. Get them like some simple carbohydrates and get those blood sugar levels back to normal. That's also a very important thing to kind of keep an eye on. So encourage your clients to monitor their glucose. One of the best ways they can do that is just like through a urine test. They don't have to take their blood in the morning necessarily, although there's plenty of like blood glucose testing devices where they do little finger prick and things like that. But just try to monitor it, one way or another, like, urine test or whatever. Make sure that you encourage your athletes who are diabetic to test their blood sugar levels before showing up at the gym. Because if they come in and their blood sugar levels are already a little bit low, and then you start burning through that glucose, they might end up hypoglycemic. They might get nauseous that day. They might pass out even. We certainly don't want that. Or if their blood sugar levels are too high, because we know that if blood sugar is like really high, eventually what's going to happen is the body's going to create a whole bunch of insulin in response. So if their blood sugar is high and they're like, let's go, let's work out, and they start working out, and it's like, yeah, I'm pumped up. It's like, okay, this is great. And then all of a sudden their blood sugar levels start to drop. They can plummet. And again, same thing, make them hypoglycemic. They're going to get nauseous. They might pass out. So we just want to watch that. We want to try to get them into like normal levels there. So that is diabetes. Last thing to talk about before I ask you if you how you guys are doing, is that you can also become a certified diabetes educator. So if you think that you're going to end up working in a lot of like weight loss scenarios and things like that, you guys can actually get a specific CDE certification. You become a diabetes educator. This is really no different than any other nutritionist. But basically what happens is like you are a nutritionist who specializes in diabetes. Now, again, it doesn't mean that you can prescribe diets to diabetics, but it just is something to have on your resume that sort of sets you apart. So if you think that you're going to end up working in like a very medical based side of the training industry, or if you find that you're going to be working with like a lot of diabetics, maybe in a weight loss program or something like that, this is a certification that actually might suit you very, very, very well. So again, complex carbs, avoid sugary foods, try to keep your protein intake normal, and keep your fat around like 30% of the total intake. When it comes to long bouts of exercise, if they are going for like a big long hike or something, try to get enough carbohydrates consistently in, 15 to 30 grams every 30 to 60 minutes. That is, a half a bottle of Gatorade. Again, I don't love Gatorade because it's mostly sugar, but that is like a really good sort of example and a really fast acting carbohydrate. So sports gels are really good. Again, these are like juice options. We also like figs. I know it sounds kind of weird, but like figs or dates are super high in sugar, so they can raise your blood sugar levels like that. And then if they are doing like carbohydrate loading, let's say you have a diabetic who is maybe trying to run a half marathon or a marathon or something, yeah, you can do the same carbohydrate loading schedule as normal. This looks exactly the same as our regular client. So 50% carbs, and then 3 days prior, you load it up and go up about 65% carbs. So it's like they do get high carbohydrates, but just be careful with the carbohydrate loading with your diabetic clients. If they're not also engaging in exercise, it doesn't make any sense for them to do like a loading schedule, right? Like I've known, people who are like, you trying to do a marathon and they're lazy about their marathon training, and then they're like, oh, I'm going to carb load, and then like all they're doing is just bringing carb. It's like they never emptied their glycogen stores in the first place. So like if you never empty them, carb loading is not doing anything for you. You're not filling them back up. So make sure you're recognizing any of the emergencies. If you notice that your client is hyperglycemic, where there's too much sugar in their blood, sometimes they'll get a little shaky. So watch for that and say like, hey, let's, one of the things you can do is like, honestly, go do some like more intense versions of exercise, and that can kind of like level things out, but also they're not going to feel very good. So you might actually just have to have them sit and kind of wait through it. That sucks. And then there's hypoglycemic, which is like where too much insulin drives all the sugar out of their blood to cause them to like feel really nauseous and sick. So watch for that. So hypoglycemic, they'll feel like, they'll be very hungry. They will get shakiness in both of these, which is kind of a bummer. But they'll feel very incoordinated, irritable, headachy, all the things that all of us experience when we are, haven't had food in a couple hours. Hyperglycemic, a lot of times they'll get like restless and very kind of paranoid, very thirsty because their body's like, give me some water so I can get the sugar diluted, blurred vision. And then they can cause like nausea and muscle cramps, which sucks because basically like, everything's just trying to work and there's just too much sugar everywhere. So if you have to, encourage your athlete to have insulin with them if they do take it synthetically. But in cases of like low blood sugar, which is probably what you'll most often run into, just make sure you have some carbohydrate rich foods available and you can raise their blood sugar levels back to normal. If it gets really bad, then, you can always call emergency services or something. So that is diabetes. That's probably the most common one you guys are going to run into, right? I mean, obviously, like, we're going to work with like youths and athletes and things like that. But generally, like diabetes are just a very common thing to work with. I hope this didn't make it sound like, whoa, this is nerve wracking. Like, I hope this didn't make it seem like there's, you're going to have these blood sugar emergencies. Most diabetics have been diabetics for quite some time. They know what they're doing. They know how to manage their blood sugar levels. But accidents happen, I try to manage my blood sugar levels. I don't have diabetes or anything, but like, I know I get cranky when my blood sugar levels get low. And I try to make sure that I like have snacks throughout the day. Doesn't always happen. Sometimes like I just don't have time. I get cranky, it happens to me, happens to your clients, happens to everybody. I'm sure you're the same way every now and then. So for the most part, we all know how to manage our blood sugar. Diabetics are no different. The odds of you actually dealing with these emergencies are pretty low, but I've definitely been working with clients before and been out on a hike or something like that, and their blood sugar levels drop and they start to feel really nauseous. And, we'll usually have like orange slices or a banana available. And it's like, here you go. We wait, they feel better. We finish the hike, we get them back and get them a healthy meal. Any questions or comments, guys? How do you feel about diabetes? Is that all pretty clear? Do we understand how insulin and glucagon work and hyper and hypoglycemia?
Yes. We learned about it earlier, but this helps a lot too because it's more in the aspect of what we're learning towards this unit, where we're actually learning about. So it's pretty useful because my dad is actually diabetic. My dad's diabetic. He takes pretty good care of his health, although
Good.
he drinks a lot, like a lot. I'm not gonna get into that, but he takes care of his health. But yeah, no, like this is really interesting. It's really interesting because he talks about this stuff that he has to keep his blood sugar low or like he'll die.
Yes. Yeah. Because it interrupts your cell's ability to do what they need to do. Joseph, do you have a question?
No, I was just saying I grew up with a lot of diabetics. My dad's stepfather was a diabetic, but he always had the issue he couldn't gain weight. He was the skinniest man I've ever known.
Oh yeah, was he type 1 diabetic?
I don't know. I really didn't talk to him.
Probably, if he's having trouble with that.
But like my mom, she became diabetic when she got sick, and so I was responsible for taking care of her, responsible for making sure to check her blood sugar and doing everything for her. So I kind of like learned from her nurses when they're telling me, okay, you need to make sure she's this, you need to make sure this is at this level after she eats. And
yeah, it's a pain. I can't imagine dealing with it because you could do like the blood tests all the time. Like, can't handle it.
I had a friend who was diabetic and all he ever did was drink and go out and party. I'm like, should you be doing that?
Right. Oh my gosh. Okay, well, let's talk about prenatal clients. So this will be a little bit rare depending on where you end up, but it's a great market to have. By the way, NASM actually offers, if you go to their website, and you take a look at all the various like bundles that they've got, all of those little, where is it? Oh, that's cool. Free course. Open that up real quick. Always try to grab all the free courses. But if you go to specializations, women's fitness specialists, so the WFS. This isn't one of them that's in our program, but when you need your continuing education units, this can be a really great certification to get, because it will actually like talk a little bit about like how to train clients who get pregnant, or how to like maintain your health during that. There's a lot of really good specific info out there, and some business for you guys. It's a really good way to kind of set yourself apart from other trainers in your gym. So if you end up working with like a pregnant athlete, this is somebody who's usually going to like stay active, usually up until about the 3rd trimester. And it's really healthy. It's really good. A lot of people get really nervous about like clients who are pregnant. It's like, oh, you're going to harm the baby or whatever. There's very little evidence to suggest that you can, but basically they want to stay active, maybe because their doctor's telling them to. They want to manage their blood sugar. I mean, like prenatal diabetes is very common. Happens in, it's like a very, they call it gestational diabetes. And it's like where a mother will, she's basically trying to create insulin for 2 separate bodies, and so it just doesn't work very well. And so whoop, causes massive amounts of weight gain, causes health problems, and that can last after the pregnancy is over. So we do got to make some differences here with some nutritional adjustments. Big ones that we're going to focus on. We are going to increase total calories, not by as much as you would think. It's basically, look at the BMR calculator. Let's see if this actually works. Most BMR calculators, it's like built in where if the body weight is too low. But it's like, let's say somebody is, okay, so the minimum age here is 15. Let's see if I can find one. Let's see if this works. I need to find like a calculator that doesn't care. We'll say, 1 year old. How much the baby was? It was like 8 pounds. And maybe that's a heavy bit. I don't know. And then what? They'd be like, maybe 1 foot tall. Oh, it has to go to a bare minimum of 4'7". Well, there's not going to be a baby. But you hit calculate. It's like they're burning. Yeah, that's totally wrong. 909 calories on the basal metabolic rate. If they were 4 feet tall, they're about half of that. So really, how much do you think like a pregnant mother needs to increase their calories by? It's not nearly as much, about 300 calories a day. That's not as substantial as you would think, but we are going to make a big adjustment here, right? We're going to increase total calories, more protein. That's going to be important to make sure that like there's enough nitrogen present to develop a new body. And then plenty of vitamin A, which is helpful for like eye development. All of the B complex are going to be huge. A lot of pregnant mothers will take a B multivitamin. Plenty of vitamin C, magnesium, iron are really big. Iron, so that again, we can make hemoglobin in the blood, and then lots of fluids to make it easy to like bring all this in. That's an increase of about 300 calories per day. Ideally, most pregnant athletes should be gaining anywhere from 25 to 35 pounds during like a pregnancy. So you think about like 300 extra calories a day, right? And then that's going to be over like a 9-month period. So that's going to be how many weeks are in a month? It's like 4.3. So 4.3 times 9. So that's about 11,610 extra calories. There's 3,500 calories in a pound of fat. This isn't a pound of fat that we're growing, but yeah. And then multiply that by 10. And there we go. It's about 33 pounds, that's about right. 300 calories per day, So ideally, they're going to get a little bit of extra protein, usually about 20 to 25 grams extra beyond like what they would normally eat per day. So again, we go back to our protein recommendations, right? We recommend, if it's a strength athlete, now obviously like a pregnant athlete is probably not participating in strength strength training. They're not trying to improve their 1 rep max during this time. They're just trying to maintain athleticism, maintain health, right? So if you increase their, their protein intake, by about 20-25 grams, it'll probably put them about 1 gram per pound. And that's going to be a really good spot to be in. So protein is obviously very critical there. We do want to make sure we're in we call it a positive nitrogen balance. You guys know that term, where there's enough protein coming in, right? Usually coming from healthy sources. This is coming from the USD, the FDA. So obviously we're going to see milk in here. My take on milk is probably not as important, but like 24 ounces of skim milk is a good source of protein. That'd be plenty. That would be like 16 grams, I think. 3 ounces of beef, chicken, or fish is really good. That's going to be like 20-30 grams. 1.5, if they're vegetarian or vegan, 1.5 grams of cups, beans, lentils, anything like that, very high in protein. Nuts are very high in protein. Lots of really good sources for our pregnant athletes and stuff. So, we can see a non-pregnant, sedentary person who weighs, I think, 180, right? 2 times. Yeah. Oh no, that's not right. I can't remember how much the person weighs in this example, but like ideally it's about 46 grams of protein a day for a non. So then it'd be about 71 grams for a pregnant athlete. So you can just see the numbers are a little bit higher. Folate, remember that's part of our B complex. That's a huge one, by the way. Folate and niacin and biotin, all of those are really important for pregnant athletes. Those are all B vitamins. So it is important probably a lot of times to get enough of those B vitamins, which honestly protein sources are going to be packed full of them. And then dark leafy green vegetables. But if they need to take a supplement, that can always be helpful. Vitamin C, vitamin A, magnesium, and iron. You can see all these numbers are just a little bit higher. Iron is substantially higher, actually. But the rest of them are, just a little bit higher in every category. And that's it. Honestly, guys, like you think like there'd be a lot more info for pregnant athletes because you're like, oh, I got to be so careful. I got to be so cautious. Honestly, guys, it's fine. There's not, it's very, there are a lot of problems. Like people are very worried during pregnancy and like, yeah, there are definitely losses in pregnancy and stuff, which is brutal. But like once you're past like some of those like, more dangerous times and stuff, people get really nervous about like, it's like, oh, I didn't know I was pregnant and I had a glass of wine at dinner. Is my baby going to be okay? Yeah, it's going to be fine. Think about like how many kids grew up perfectly fine before we knew any of this was bad for us, or look at like, developing countries where, people are giving birth in are broken down. They're gonna be fine. I don't want to be too casual about it, but make logical reductions. For honestly, guys, you'll see. I remember there was this CrossFit athlete. She got like a bunch of flack online. Like people were so mean to this lady, and she was like, 9 months pregnant, and she did this like photo shoot of her doing like full on like hang cleans and snatches and stuff, like pretty impressive stuff. And she was fine. Baby grew up perfectly healthy, no problems at all. Now, someone who's never exercised before tries to do that. Yeah, they're probably going to get hurt, but that has nothing to do with like being, pregnant or whatever. So just be aware. Make some, we call it a logical reduction.
Hey, Brad, I have a question.
Yeah.
So when I took a prenatal yoga class for instruction, I remember the teacher, I guess she had been teaching and she was also like, she was like a big science nerd too. She was saying, I guess a lot of doctors should just tell them pregnant women, as long as you've been exercising, just keep doing it because it's not going to affect you because your body's already used to it.
Yes. But
new people are the ones that need to go really, really light and start really slow.
Sure. And that will happen sometimes, that's actually never happened to me in my career. Like every client that I've worked with that has been like a pregnant client is one that I was working with beforehand. I've never had somebody like come to the gym and be like, I've never worked out before and I'm 9 months pregnant. Like that's not going to happen very often. But yes, the idea is to just maintain physical activity. And it doesn't take much to maintain your muscle mass. You actually, they've done studies of like, you know, bodybuilders who are cutting for like a competition, or like athletes who are in like an off season, even as little as 2 days of strength training per week can maintain your muscle mass. It doesn't take as much as you're not going to gain any muscle mass only working out twice a week, but like it's enough to help you maintain. But yeah, like the stress, if they're not used to dealing with that stress, I wouldn't say it is any more dangerous than anybody else who's new to the gym, right? We start all of our new clients in a gentle workout. You're not bringing, it's like, hey, welcome to the gym, 500 burpees today. It's your first day. Let's go. You know, like you shouldn't do that with anybody. But yeah, I think that tracks pretty well with what we're saying here. All right, let's talk about kids. What about you training youths? You know, next mod, we're getting into an entire module on how to work with youth clients. So a lot of like kids will sometimes, like when we're looking at it and we're measuring like whether or not like obesity is a thing, we're going to be looking at what's called like, you know, specific growth channels. A growth channel, by the way, is not something like a physiologic term. It's just a medical term that we use to kind of understand how kids actually grow. So, you know, physical activity is so freaking good for youths. It helps build strong muscles, strong bones. It can psychologically have very positive benefits on like confidence, self-esteem. And it creates the main thing, and this is something you're going to hear me say a lot next module. The main thing the reason we work with kids, we're not trying to make the world's greatest youth athlete. Really, we're just trying to create like a little human that's going to grow up into a big human with healthy lifestyle choices. You know, like we're trying to help them develop like lifelong activity patterns. That's what we're going for most of the time. But we are going to pay attention to their growth channel. So we look at a height to weight relationship. This might sound very similar to the body mass index, but we're also going to pay attention to age here, which is why we're going to measure youth BMI exactly the same. We still do weight in kilograms divided by height in meters squared for kids. It is identical for how we calculate the number. But what that number means is very different depending on the age. So we have a sliding scale. And so what you'll see, little kids will have a little bit of baby fat left, and then it drops down, and then it continues to rise like as they get older and approach adulthood, right? So we're looking at like a 2-year-old, and then like it drops down, but then eventually like, you know, starts to go up at a very normal, almost linear rate, not quite linear, right? But somewhat, you know. And what we're going to look at is we're going to look at where they fall in the overall percentile of age to height. So our other BMI ranges, you know, we were looking at, you know, 18 to 24, 25 to 20. We don't do that with kids. These are straight lines, which don't make sense to use with youths. With youths, we've got kind of a curve here, right? So instead, we're not going to pay attention to what the number means with like a range, right? The number was calculated the same. The math behind like kilograms, height, meters squared, right? That's the same. But what it means, we look at the percentile of where they fall against the rest of the population. Right. So anywhere from like the 5th percentile up to the 85th percentile, that's great. Anything from 85 to 95 is overweight, and anything above 95 is going to be considered obese. Anything below 5 is going to be considered underweight. So that's we call that the growth channel, right? And it's how kids kind of grow. It's like it's really rapid, then it slows down like crazy, and then picks up sort of a normal pace after that. When it comes to like sports and stuff, another thing about like growth is that it occurs in the plates of the ends of our bones. So when we look at like a cow, you know, you probably might remember, what is this? Oh, it's the Lunar New Year. Got it. See this all the time. We look at how youths are actually like growing. I spelled that wrong for sure. You look at what's called the epiphyseal plates. So the ends of your bones are what are known as your epiphyses. And basically this is where the bone growth is happening, right? It's happening right at the ends of our bones. So basically your bones, when they grow away from themselves. They grow like longer like this, end to end. And so we need to make sure that we have a diet and exercise routine that's going to sort of promote that, by having like plenty of protein, plenty of calcium, plenty of phosphorus, and plenty of physical activity. The physical activity is going to trigger the growth. So we're going to pay attention. Well, I would say this is where we start to get into like medical information. We're not going to pay attention to this as much as like doctors are, but they are going to pay attention to like height and weight growth and see like, you know, if a youth is expected to grow at X number of inches per year and they don't, then that's where a doctor is going to say, hey, we might look at calcium intake, you know, and maybe increase that, and then look at physical activity and try to increase that to ensure that growth is going to happen properly, right? So trainers, we do play like a big role here. Parents obviously play a big role here in shaping this, where we are trying to make sure they're on a regular meal schedule, getting plenty of, you know, proteins and calciums and things like that, and lots of snacks throughout the day, and then being physically active, right? So you can see pudding cups are really good. Sorry, I think somebody burned something downstairs. Pudding cups are big, yogurt, smoothies, cheese cubes are huge, getting plenty of milk, right? So we're seeing a lot of dairy products that are rich in calcium. Crackers, big bar cereals, things that kids like to eat as well. Sorry, give me 1 second. I'm gonna make sure that my house isn't on fire. Just 1 second here. Okay. So a lot of healthy snack options there. Now, fluid is also really important. Kids hate drinking water. They hate staying hydrated, but they're part of the population that it is incredibly important to make sure that they stay freaking hydrated. So fluid intake for kids, making sure they get plenty of like juices. If they like water, then great, make them drink water. But you're trying to make sure that you're balancing out their water balance, right? If they get dehydrated, they're not going to feel very good. Here's one of the reasons why it's also very important. Youths absolutely suck at regulating body temperature. They overheat very, very easily, but they also get way too cold very, very easily. And the reason for that is because they got all this blood, but they have this little tiny body with little tiny surface area. And that lack of surface area makes it difficult for them to like manage their body temperature. So flavored beverages are a really good source to make sure that like if they don't want to stay hydrated, it's like, well, what about chocolate milk? And it's like, oh great, I like chocolate milk, right? Now that is going to be higher in sugar, but at least they're bringing in calcium, they're getting a little bit hydrated. What about like juice? Yeah, I don't like water, I like juice, right? Again, a little bit of sugar in there, but sugar is probably not going to hurt kids as much as long as they're also being physically active. Now, don't go crazy on that. Obviously, there are a lot more obese children in this country right now than there ever have been. We have a lot of unhealthy options and way too much sugar available. But if they're being physically active, this is a good way to ensure that, like, you know, you are rehydrating them. So special focus placed on calcium, special focus placed on hydration. Iron is also going to be a big one because, again, they are developing. You know, there's a body that's growing, which means they're making new red blood cells all the time. So we need to make sure that we have plenty of iron to sort of support that. Now, you will also, yeah, I was like, for a second, I thought that goes out of order. What about like youths that are not necessarily youths, but what about like, you know, Simon, how old are you? David, I know you're like 18.
22.
22? Oh yeah, you're just at the tail end of it, but like, what about like college age athletes, right? Like, you know, you guys are falling into that category for sure. You know, there are some other things to pay attention to when it comes to calories. Your calorie intake is probably going to be a lot higher than mine. I'm in my 30s. My metabolism is going this way, you know, like, it makes sense to make sure that you guys are also getting enough calories in your diet. So having a regular meal schedule and like, you know, But the other nice thing is you're also like at like a point in the life cycle where like muscle growth is, peaking. So engaging in like high intensity exercise is very safe at your age. You're not likely to pull anything, you're not likely to damage anything. High intensity strength training can be a really good thing here with plenty of carbohydrates to give you the energy to do that. If you're going to try and go for strength gains, now is the best time of your life to do that. So collegiate level athletes are great. This is where like meal plans are always very helpful. If you guys end up working in like a university, like maybe on like a football team as like one of the athletic trainers, because they will often have like a team of them, encouraging those athletes to get like the freaking unlimited meal plan, go for it, right? Get those calories in, but also encouraging them to engage in like balanced meals, I remember kids with like those freaking meal plans who would then just like load it up with like all of the, ice cream, that are in, there was an ice cream machine in my school, like all those things. That's not really what those meal plans are supposed to be used for, but maybe they do, it's a good source of calories at least, but try to engage in that. Now, also, there is like alcohol consumption, very common amongst like youth athletes and stuff. Alcohol is not very beneficial in any capacity. Unfortunately, the reality of alcohol, like we used to think that like, oh, a glass of wine at dinner keeps you healthy. We know that alcohol is pretty much irredeemable. It doesn't have any positive qualities, unfortunately. It can be good at helping loosen you up so you can talk to members of the, like someone you're attracted to. Okay, that's helpful, but like often what we see instead is we see a lot of like binge drinking, like 5 or more drinks. If that happens, alcohol is going to spike blood sugar levels. This is highly associated with diabetes, unfortunately. And then your body will have to prioritize metabolizing that alcohol before it will metabolize anything else, because alcohol is by your body kind of considered like a toxin. Your body's like, holy crap, drop what we're doing. Let's deal with this alcohol. And that is why like it slows the absorption of all those other materials. This is why some people have like gastrointestinal distress a day after drinking. And it's because like all of the food they consume didn't get broken down or digested. Your body spent the entire time, digesting an entire bottle of champagne, because it was New Year's or something, like your body will always metabolize alcohol first, which is going to slow things down. That also causes a lot of like hormonal disturbances and things like that. So, some alcohol is absorbed in the mouth, but a lot of it is going to get processed in your stomach, and then it gets to your small intestine. That's where most of it's being absorbed. And what happens is alcohol in the form of like what we call ethanol gets broken down into alcohol dehydrogenase. This is actually what makes you feel drunk. And then that gets broken down into these other things. And for the record, alcohol does have calories in it that can be used for energy production, but you are left with all this extra alcohol dehydrogenase. It does eventually get converted into acetyl-CoA and go through the Krebs cycle. Surprisingly, the problem with that freaking alcohol is that all that dehydrogenase is left over afterwards. This is also what causes your hangovers. So when they say like drink plenty of water after you drink a lot of alcohol, that can sometimes help. But honestly, one of the best things you can do is eat like a fatty, greasy meal. Some of the fats from that can actually help slow that absorption down and give your body time to kind of catch up. Which I think our bodies know. This is why like when you do have like a night of drinking, everyone's like, let's go to McDonald's, like, so everybody kind of has those cravings. They're looking for like that really fatty material. At least that's my working theory. Don't quote me on that. So here you can see like how many calories. There's actually not a lot of carbohydrates, 12 grams in like a 12-ounce beer, but a whole bunch of calories there. Alcohol has 7 calories per gram in it. So like for every gram of alcohol, there's going to be 7 calories, but now there's also, so like Normally, we count up the calories in fats, proteins, and carbs when we're talking about normal food. Now you have a whole new category. How many grams of alcohol are there? Times 7 for every gram. So definitely a lot of calories in there. If you're having like, a pina colada, that's like packed with calories. This is a sugary drink or a daiquiri. Stay away from that stuff. That's hangover juice. So that's alcohol. I know we didn't really discuss alcohol that often. NASM really doesn't take like a big stance on it because it's basically the type of thing that we're just trying to generally avoid. Any other questions on any of that? Questions, comments, concerns? I'm good. All right, let's talk about master athletes, which is the greatest name for, like, I want to be, when I'm older, I want to be considered a master athlete. This is a senior. That's what I mean. We're talking about senior athletes, older folks who are still engaging in physical activities. That old guy on the basketball court that maybe isn't as fast as he used to be, he doesn't run quite as hard, but he just knows how to play defense. Like he knows how to herd you into the corner because he's got decades of playing pickup basketball. Knows how to like posture up and you just can't get around him. That's a master athlete, right? So somebody in their 40s, 50s, maybe even older, right? We need to make some nutritional changes here. Diet adaptations, number one, we are going to pay attention to the nutrient needs of their sport. Again, if they are a 50-year-old person who's marathoning, they need a lot of carbohydrates, right? Just like any other marathoner would. But we're going to make some calorie changes here. We're probably going to reduce caloric intake in general. Luckily, that's the easiest thing in the world because you've already done like a BMR calculation, right? So let's take a look at, like, let's say I maintain, my body weight. Let's see. Let's say I maintain the same body weight. I'm 33 now, so I'm burning about 1,793 calories a day. But now I'm 60, right? That's going to drop down to 1,658. It's not a huge difference. It's only a loss of about 100 calories, but it does change more substantially if I'm still engaging in daily exercise. It's 2,500 calories versus, again, go back to 33. That's 27. That's a big difference at the end, right? We look at somebody like David, 18 years old, like 1,868 versus somebody who's 60. Again, it's dropping down to 1,650. So it is going to make a difference there in terms of energy, intake and stuff. You also want to make sure that you're keeping an eye on like calcium intake. Osteoporosis is very common among seniors, so we want to make sure we have enough calcium to keep our bones healthy. Vitamin D to use that calcium. Remember the sunshine vitamin D helps us absorb calcium more effectively. Magnesium, chromium, and iron, making sure that we have plenty of minerals in order to make certain materials. And then paying attention to their protein intake, anywhere from like 1 to like 1.3 grams per kilogram of body weight is going to be recommended. So if that was me, right, that's going to be 79 kilograms times, say 1.3, it's 103 grams per day minimum to ensure that I'm maintaining muscle mass. If I'm exercising, I'm going to need even more than that. Moderate amount of fat, that's totally normal. 20 to 35% is what we normally see. Chromium is very helpful for seniors. It actually helps with like body temperature even and things like that. So we are going to pay attention to that. You can get plenty of chromium in your diet simply by getting like very, again, dark leafy green vegetables, but like lentils and beans, good sources as well. Iron, calcium, vitamin D. Magnesium is acting as like an electrolyte, so that's important. We don't want our senior clients cramping up. Now, obviously, there's a lot of diseases that sort of come along with being like a senior. I say diseases, comorbidities, right? So things like atherosclerosis, if they start to have like fat buildup in their blood vessels, we want to decrease total fat, especially saturated fat, and focus on cholesterol, low cholesterol foods, complex carbohydrates, and most importantly, probably lots of fiber. So plenty of fruits, plenty of vegetables. If our clients have certain types of cancers, decrease the total fat, watch the meat intake that are, associated with like preservatives and stuff. Get rid of that alcohol content. Watch the salty and cured foods, and focus on, again, high fiber fruits and vegetables. Arthritis, we're going to watch depending on like we're going to watch their body weight. Oftentimes seniors deal with arthritis because their bodies are just heavy, so that's causing more impact on the joints. And we're going to focus particularly on omega-3 foods, so healthy fats like monounsaturated fats, oils. They actually have been shown to reduce inflammation, which is kind of nice. So there's more, but these are all the like general like adjustments to make. Again, you don't have to keep this stuff on the top of your head. Ideally, what you would do is you would do a PAR-Q with a client, do a general medical history questionnaire, start to scratch out some general healthy nutrition plans, go home, do your research, bring it back and say, all right, here's like a healthy meal plan of someone that would, here's something that would work for somebody like you. Again, we don't prescribe it and say, I want you to eat this, but we say like, hey, Joseph, I know that you're dealing with some arthritis issues. I know that you've got hypertension issues. These are two like food choices that have been associated with like positive effects for those things. I was like, oh, okay. Like we come in with the information. Didn't tell you anything. I just made it so enticing that you want to do it, And lastly, what if we're working with a client who is a vegan/vegetarian? There are a couple different vegetarian types out there. We'll come back to this. But we can see like semi-vegetarian, that's usually somebody who just doesn't eat red meat. They engage in everything else, but just not that. They're not necessarily a vegetarian because they're still eating like chickens and things like that, but there's sort of a version of it, right? There's what's called an ovo-vegetarian. That's a vegetarian who basically does not eat any animal products except eggs. So ovo-vegetarians do eat eggs. You've also got lacto-vegetarians that doesn't eat anything except they will engage in milk. And then there's lacto-ovo-vegetarians, that's milk and eggs allowed. There's pescetarians. Pescetarians are a vegetarian who consumes fish only when it comes to meat. Lots of different types. And then a vegan is a person who does not eat any animal product. They don't even take, like, let's say they have like a B vitamin, let's see here. Actually, you know what? Let's say Advil liquid gels. You guys know the liquid, there's sort of two different types of pills, right? There's the hard pills, and then there's these. There's like little liquid gel things, right? So a vegan can't take these. They would not take these because the gel, the capsule, is made out of animal fat. It comes from collagen and animal fats and stuff. Jello, can't eat that as a vegan. It's made from animal fat. So vegans, like, they don't engage in any animal product, honey, whatever. Whereas like, there's other, sort of different subsections of veganism. Vegetarian is somebody who basically is a vegan, but usually engages in some version of, alteration there. So our nutrition strategies with vegetarians, vegans, whatever, is to ensure that they're getting a full amino acid complex. So we're going to do a lot of like complementary proteins, which is why we kind of look at the special food pyramid here, right? Again, we kind of got rid of the food pyramid, but it works pretty well for our vegetarian clients. Fruits and vegetables plus whole grains plus beans and legumes. You put those three things together, you're going to have a complete amino acid profile. Throw some nuts and seeds in there. That's also going to help, seeds plus grains, seeds plus legumes, veggies, right? All those things are going to kind of create in a complete amino acid profile. So we need to make sure that we're doing that in order to fill them up. Or they can engage in specific animal products. Sometimes like certain vegetarians will take like egg whites and dairy and things like that. If that's within their lifestyle, great. Now we're ensuring that, yeah, they definitely are filling in the gaps, definitely getting plenty of protein and stuff. So when it comes to proteins, we're focused on legumes. Those are beans, nuts, fortified soy products. Soy is a complete protein by itself, which is kind of cool. That is a plant, but it is also a complete protein. It has all the amino acids similar to animal products. So soy is really good. And quinoa. Quinoa is like another one. That's a grain that has all the amino acids. So Definitely paying attention to plenty of like legumes and soy products and stuff. They're really rich in iron. They're really rich in zinc, calcium, and then protein, very importantly. Protein powders, like vegan proteins, are going to be blends of those things. If it's a vegan protein, just make sure it's a complete protein. Not all vegan proteins are created equally. So you want to try to get what's called a you want to focus on like some of these words, like fast absorbing, high quality vegan protein. That way we ensure that it's a complete protein or complementary protein, I guess, because it's complementary because it's adding a bunch of stuff. Doesn't have any whey in it is the big deal. So we need to make sure that it's like a complete protein source. And then focusing on like whole foods, right? Obviously, like one of the biggest problems with like vegans, and you'll hear people like trash people who are vegans sometimes. You'll hear people like talk trash about like, it's like, I don't look very healthy. Yeah, anybody can be unhealthy with a bad diet. Vegan does not translate to healthy diet. That's not what it means. It just means no animal products. Remember, this is a good way to remember this. Oreos are vegan friendly. This is a vegan safe food. It does not have any animal products in it, right? Is it healthy? I didn't say that, right? So yeah, you will know plenty of vegetarians, plenty of vegans who unfortunately are not, getting a complete healthy diet. Doesn't always translate. Okay. Summarizing everything up, right? So watch for diabetes. Again, it's a metabolic disorder. It affects glucose levels. If you have diabetes, try to be consistent, with your meal plan, like eating at the same time, taking your insulin at the same time, all the things that are going to keep your blood sugar levels from spiking. That's the problem. The real problem is not blood sugar. The problem is rapid changes in blood sugar. That's what we're trying to avoid. Pregnant clients, make sure that they're paying attention to adequate protein intake, iron, and then lots and lots of B vitamins. Young athletes, make sure they're getting plenty of calcium, protein, and physical activity. Pay attention to college athletes. Make sure that they are like learning how to grocery shop properly for healthy options, not just drinking lots of alcohol every night. And then master athletes, again, plenty of protein, but also like plenty of calcium. That's a big one. Osteoporosis, super common in seniors, so we're trying to avoid that. And then vegetarians, it is an alternative choice for meals, but your food choices are still very varied. I've goofed around with veganism just for fun to see like how difficult it is, certain clients that go through it and stuff. It's not as bad as it seems. I did get tired of tofu pretty quick though, and did not know how to cook it properly. That stuff is tricky to make taste good. But yeah, that's honestly about it today, guys. Any questions or comments? I know it's a little bit of a shorter one, but
No, thank you.
all right. So schedule got screwed up. The final exam is up today. Please try to knock that out. We still had our homework. Our last homework was on Friday, so by now you should have had plenty of time to study it. Practice your homeworks a little bit. Take that final. It's also just a bunch of nutrition questions. Not as bad as it sounds. Most people really do feel like it's like, okay, that was much easier than the physiology finals and stuff. But if you have any questions, shoot me a text, give me a call, and yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow for weight loss.